What if I told you that after just one Grand Prix with Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton has already started to make Charles Leclerc uncomfortable within his own team? Because what happened in Australia was not simply Hamilton's debut dressed in red. Within Ferrari, they expected a long, complicated adaptation process, even with some discrete weekends while the Briton understood the car. But what they saw in Melbourne was something very different. Hamilton began to find rhythm, he began to approach Leclerc's level, and most surprising of all, he did it much faster than Frédéric Vasseur himself expected. Suddenly, the driver who arrived to learn about the car was starting to put pressure inside the garage. And that opens up a huge question for Ferrari this season. Can Lewis Hamilton become team leader sooner than anyone imagined? Because after the Australian Grand Prix, something has become very clear. Hamilton's adaptation to Ferrari is advancing at a speed that is already surprising the entire paddock. However, since the beginning of the weekend in Melbourne, signs began to appear that changed that narrative. Hamilton began working intensively with the engineers to understand the behavior of the car in the different phases of the corner, especially at the entrance and in the transition to acceleration. The interesting thing was that he quickly began to modify his driving style to better adapt to the characteristics of the Ferrari. One of the keys was how he began to adopt certain driving techniques that Charles Leclerc already used with this car, such as releasing the accelerator earlier and applying the brakes more aggressively to maintain a higher minimum speed when cornering. That adjustment was essential because the Ferrari demands a very specific way of managing weight transfer and front axle stability. That change in his driving was visible especially during qualifying. Although Leclerc remained the natural reference within the team, Hamilton managed to get much closer than many expected. In fact, he was just a couple of tenths off the Monegasque's pace, something that under normal circumstances would be considered a solid result for any driver who has just joined a new team. But in Hamilton's case, what was truly important was not just the difference in time, but the speed with which he had managed to understand the car and begin to extract real performance from it. Inside the Ferrari garage, this began to generate an unexpected sensation. The adaptation process was progressing faster than expected. When it came time for the race, the Australian Grand Prix became a completely different challenge. The changing weather conditions added an extra layer of difficulty to a track that already demands maximum precision. Hamilton was not only facing his rivals, he was also having his first experience racing in the rain with the Ferrari. These types of situations tend to be particularly complicated for a driver who is still learning the limits of the car, because every small reaction of the car can change when the asphalt loses grip. Even so, the Briton managed to remain competitive amid the chaos that characterized much of the race. One of the most complicated moments came right after the start. In the first corner, there was a small contact with his own teammate that ended up altering his position on the track and left him trapped behind other cars for a good part of the race. Under normal conditions, this type of situation is already complicated to resolve, but in Melbourne the uncertainty of the weather and the constant evolution of the track were also added. As the laps progressed, the race became a strategic battle where every decision from the wall could mean the difference between gaining positions or getting stuck in traffic. Ferrari made a decision that would end up seriously affecting the final result. When the rain began to fall, the team decided to stay on the track longer than several of their rivals before changing tires. The idea was to take advantage of a possible strategic window, but the result was the opposite. Both Hamilton and Leclerc lost important positions while other drivers had already made the right change at the right time. This strategic decision further complicated the race for Hamilton, who was already struggling to make up ground after the initial incident. Despite all these difficulties, what really caught the team's attention was the pace that Hamilton began to show throughout the weekend. Beyond the final result, Ferrari's engineers began to see something they did not expect to see so soon. The Briton was understanding the car, was finding confidence, and was beginning to approach the real limit of the car. That process normally requires several races, but in Australia the signs were that Hamilton was already taking much faster steps than expected. And that's where the real story behind this Grand Prix begins. Because while from the outside many simply saw a complicated debut, inside Ferrari they began to realize something much more important. Lewis Hamilton was not just learning the car, he was beginning to become a real competitor within the team itself from the first weekend. The Australian Grand Prix left something much more important than a simple result in the standings. Inside Ferrari, what really started to attract attention was not where Lewis Hamilton finished the race, but how his performance had evolved over the course of the weekend. And that is where the real surprise began for Charles Leclerc, for Frédéric Vasseur, and for a good part of the technical team. Because the Brit wasn't just understanding the car, he was starting to show signs that he could extract performance from the Ferrari much sooner than expected. From the first internal analyses after the race, Engineers began to review the data more closely. And what they found was something that completely changed the perception of Hamilton's debut. In various phases of the weekend, especially in specific sectors of the circuit, the Briton had achieved very competitive times comparable to those of his teammate. This was especially striking because Leclerc had been working with Ferrari for years and knew perfectly how the car behaved in each situation. However, Hamilton had managed to get close to his pace in just his first full race with the team, something that normally takes several rounds of the championship to achieve. The most interesting thing of all is that this improvement was no coincidence. Hamilton was applying a very clear adaptation process over the weekend. As the sessions progressed, he began to modify very specific details of his driving to better align with the characteristics of the Ferrari. Instead of trying to impose his traditional style from the start, he began experimenting with different ways of attacking corners, adjusting the braking point and managing the car's weight transfer. This type of adaptation demonstrates a capacity that has characterized his entire career: the ability to quickly understand the behavior of a car and modify its driving to maximize the available performance. But that speed of learning also began to generate something unexpected within the team. For years, Ferrari had built its sports project around Charles Leclerc. The Monégasque driver was not only the fastest driver in qualifying, he was also the one who best knew the internal workings of the team and the behavior of the car in different conditions. In theory, this should give him a clear advantage during the first races against a newcomer teammate. However, the fact that Hamilton could approach his pace so quickly began to change the dynamic inside the garage. For Frédéric Vasseur, this represents a very particular situation. On the one hand, having two drivers capable of extracting a high level of performance is a huge advantage for the team. In a long season, where the championship is often decided by small details, having two competitive drivers can make the difference against direct rivals. But at the same time, it also means that Ferrari will have to carefully manage the internal relationship between the two. If Hamilton continues to evolve at this rate, the fight within the team could intensify much sooner than expected. Another aspect that caught attention was Hamilton's own attitude after the Grand Prix. Far from being frustrated by the result, the Briton focused on highlighting everything he had learned during the weekend. He openly acknowledged that he was still discovering many details of the car and that each session allowed him to better understand how to extract its potential. This approach is important because it shows that the adaptation process is still underway, suggesting that his performance could continue to improve as the season progresses. And that is where the true dimension of what happened in Australia appears. What from the outside seems simply a complicated debut in difficult conditions, from within Ferrari was interpreted as something much more promising. Hamilton had shown that he could adapt quickly, that he could approach Leclerc's level, and that he still had room to improve as he became more familiar with the car. That completely changes Ferrari's outlook for the next races. Because if Hamilton continues to evolve at this pace, the team could find itself with a very interesting situation: two drivers capable of fighting at the highest level from the beginning of the championship. And in modern Formula One, where every point can decide a title, that combination can be one of the most powerful weapons a team can have. For Frédéric Vasseur, this situation represents both an opportunity and a challenge. Having two drivers capable of competing at the highest level can make Ferrari a much stronger force compared to its direct rivals. In a long championship, where points are added race after race, having two strong drivers can be the key to staying in the fight for the title. But at the same time, that same strength can generate internal tensions if both begin to fight for leadership of the team. Beyond the final result or the complicated circumstances that marked the race, what this weekend really left was a first clear sign of something that can define the immediate future of the Italian team. Hamilton not only arrived to begin a long and progressive adaptation process, but from the first race he began to demonstrate that he can integrate into the Ferrari's performance much faster than many imagined. Throughout the weekend in Melbourne, we saw how the Briton increasingly understood the car's behavior better, adjusting his driving style and getting closer to the team's reference pace, which for years has been in the hands of Charles Leclerc. That process, which normally requires several races or even half a season for a driver changing teams, began to unfold in a matter of days. And that is precisely the reason why within Ferrari, both the engineers and Frédéric Vasseur himself began to look with different eyes at what Hamilton can contribute to this project. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.